Well, I have with me none other than Sir Martin Sorrell here from the World Economic Forum in Davos to talk about what he's making of the world. Sir Sorrell, thank you so much for your time. Good to see you.
We found you.
We found each other.
Finding you. I thought E.T. would have this magnificent studio here. No.
Next time. Yes, next time. But yes, the magnificent theme this time is all about spirit of dialogue in this world of flux that we're in.
I have a feeling it's going to be a monologue, not a dialogue.
Yeah? Why would you say that?
Well, it's very American dominated. I just walked past the USA House and then another USA House halfway down the promenade. Larry Fink is the co-chairman with Andrea Hoffman, and he's prevailed on, obviously when your biggest shareholder calls, you come, or one of your biggest, probably the biggest. So he's corralled a whole huge number of tech CEOs. Interestingly, I think there's less CEOs, I'm going to call them real companies, I don't mean real companies, but the less, package goods companies, other companies, but tech here in force. US government here in force, not just the president, but several cabinet members, Rubio, I think, Lutnick. I mean, it's going to be heavy on the US quotient.
So you don't think there will be dialogue, but it will be a monologue?
No, I think it's very difficult to get a dialogue going, particularly when the President Trump is so adept at controlling the agenda. So, he's attending Davos for the first time for some time. And he was highly critical, if I remember rightly, of the Davos audience, and now everybody here is hanging on every word he says or doesn't say. So, and he's put the cat amongst the pigeons, the Greenland cat amongst the EU pigeons over Greenland, and they're all scrambling around trying to figure out what to say or do. I don't know whether anything will get resolved here or not. We'll see on Wednesday or Thursday. But it adds to the drama.
It does. It sure does.
Certainly very different to the Davoses under Klaus Schwab.
Yeah. But since you did talk about Greenland and it's sort of keeping the world on its tenterhooks, if I can use that terminology, where do you think this is going to lead us?
I have no idea. I mean, it's so difficult to forecast what's going to happen. So you had Venezuela, and then you've had obviously Iran, the tragedy in Iran. Somebody was telling me in London that he estimates that 50,000 people have been killed in Iran by militia from outside the country, from Iraq. So difficult situation. Obviously, Maduro taken from Venezuela, although it looks like the regime will stay in place under Rodriguez. So we have to see what happens on Greenland. I was with a group yesterday of sort of Asian-orientated people, and the interesting thing about that was there was almost a feeling that the EU has to surrender Greenland to maintain peace with President Trump. So he's in the catbird seat in more than one way. And from an Indian context, I mean, India is doing brilliantly, and the World Bank figures came out this morning. India is the fastest growing economy last year, this year, and next year, according to the World Bank. The World Bank's run by an Indian, if I remember rightly, so maybe the stats are biased.
No, they're not. It's based on
probably
facts and figures.
underrepresented. So things set fair for India. I think India benefits from some of the...
We don't have a deal yet with the US.
You'll get a deal. But Modi has done, I think, in my view, a brilliant job. Brand Modi is strong, brand India is strong. Just had a discussion with one of your competitors about the difference between brand Trump and brand Modi, but both in their own ways unique. But I think Modi has done a great job for India, and India is in a great position. From an Asian point of view, it's the economy of choice after China, or maybe adjacent to China. China, I think, will continue to squeeze Taiwan. If you're big in China, do you want to really be bigger? If you're 15-20% of your sales are in China, like Apple or LVMH, you probably want to diversify a bit. And Indian entrepreneurs are now spreading their wings around the world. You see it here at Davos. So they're not only successful in the Indian context, but also in a global context. So this is a new age for India. And I think Modi's positioning between the superpowers is probably the right positioning. There's some criticism of that, I think, but it's probably unfounded. So it's a very difficult thing to deal with. I mean, as the EU leaders are demonstrating, it's very difficult to respond.
But tell me, as we look ahead into the world and how the world is going to take shape, is the mode of survival if you ally with the US? Can you oppose US and still...
Well, China has obviously taken that position. The US-China relations are not great, I think, in the long term. In the short term, there might be some deal. But in the long term, I think it's going to be difficult to get agreement.
But that's China. We're talking about a different size altogether.
Russia-Ukraine is not easy to deal with either, and neither is Iran. So you've got three major problems which I think are intractable, very difficult to deal with. On China-US, China has had to pivot away from the US economy. US is 28 trillion out of 106. China is 18, so that's 46 out of 106. So there's another 60 that China can go after. And China has been absolutely brilliant since Liberation Day. You look at the export stats, they continue to go through the stratosphere, into the stratosphere. America falls to 11% of Chinese exports, but it doesn't stop the Chinese invasion. And whatever Trump is trying to do with the Monroe Doctrine or the revised version of the Monroe Doctrine, still the biggest trading partner in most Latin American countries is China. Africa, the Middle East, Saudi, biggest trading partner of China, biggest defense partner of the US, Europe, the Canadian deal, Carney. I mean, if you want an example of maybe the pitfalls of the Trump strategy, it is Carney and China. What was interesting was President Trump's response. I think it was on Friday night. He was getting on board a helicopter to go to wherever from Washington, and he said, he sort of applauded Carney for his deal. He said, if you can make a deal with China, you should do it. So maybe that was an acknowledgement that Carney has done a good job. But taking that position between the two, I mean, the EU, the Chancellor has gone to China, Macron's gone to China, Starmer is due to go to China later this month, I think it is. So everybody is bending the knee to China too. So they're trying to play the same strategy as Modi has played, of playing both ends off against the middle. So we'll have to see what happens.
But can the global south, as they call it, and China and maybe Russia unite, and can it be then the anti-US campaign versus US campaign?
I think the plates are shifting, the worm is turning, or whatever the right way of putting it is. The simple fact is the E7 from a GDP point of view is bigger than the G7. And if you extract China from the E7 at E6 and extract US from the G7, G6, the E6 is bigger than the G6. So the balance of power is shifting. And the problem, I think, is America is unwilling to accept a G2 world. The rest of the world's willing to accept it, but they aren't. Whether that's right or wrong, I'm not smart enough to figure out. But they're not accepting it. And in that situation, the others, the also-rans, are forced to try and get crumbs from both tables. So I think the right strategy, the Carney strategy, is the right strategy. You get rebuffed by the US, you bend the knee with China, or you seek agreement with China. And EU, I mean, the interesting thing is 18 trillion, so the same size as China, sits in the EU. It's not growing like China, sits in the EU. That's a prize. So BYD in the UK now, through the roof. BYD in Europe, through the roof. BYD in Mexico, through the roof. So you look at BYD, Huawei, Shein, Tama, these are all companies that are expanding their operations very aggressively, despite the fact that China is nixed from America. And then in America, TikTok probably ends up in Larry Ellison's hands, or partly in his hands. So, they forego the opportunity in America for the opportunity elsewhere.
But tell me, you've often said that, advertising is the earliest indicator of economic stress. What are your clients telling you now about where global growth is headed?
No, it's interesting. That's decoupled. I mean, it's a really interesting point or question, because if the proxy for corporate profitability, the S&P 500, in Q3 of last year EPS was up 12%. Exclude the hyperscalers, the tech companies, it was 9%. Going into Q4, the projections, Goldman projections, 6% EPS growth. They always understate. They'll overshoot, let's say 10%. The forecast for this year is 12%. So US corporations are doing these are the global corporations. I mean, they've probably got, I don't know, 40% of their profits coming from abroad. They're doing very well. So the irony about that, what you just said, I mean, advertising is usually the canary in the coal mine. When it starts to come under pressure, indications of a recession. When it ticks up, indications that corporate profitability is improving. The interesting thing is it's decoupled. So I've never seen it like this. In the tech sector, you know, traditional media, free-to-air is down. You know, 300 billion in 24 out of a trillion. The 700 billion in digital was growing then at 10-15%. But we didn't see it. And the reason we didn't see it is the tech companies are putting this year 550 billion into CapEx. Yeah. So you've got this sort of dichotomy. So the traditional relationship between profitability, and it was not a one-to-one correlation, but it was very tight. Corporate profitability, ad spend, that has broken down in the tech world because of, I think, CapEx. Tech companies will have to come back and spend, so it will recover. The question is when. So it's a bit more tenuous. This should be a good year. Midterm elections, World Cup, Winter Olympics. Not as good as a presidential year with, you know, the Summer Olympics, which will be 28. But still, you know, it should be a good year. But it's not going to be as good in the future. And the IPG Omnicom merger, which is, you know, I've described it as two drunks leaning up against the lamppost. But it may be more accurate is to say, you know, when the chill wind blows, you huddle together, and that's what's happening. WPP got huge pressure as well. We'll see whether they can come out of it. The only company that's doing decently is Publicis, and maybe Havas a bit. Maybe there's something, as I've said, in the Parisian water that is good for advertising. But no, it's at the moment. I mean, Omnicom and IPG have cut their headcount from 127,500 when they announced the deal to 104,000. So it's a huge compression. So it's a bit like WBD and Paramount. You know, you put those two together, two studios come on one. So it's indicative of the pressure. But coming back to the point about profitability, companies are doing well, and you see it here in Davos. Right? And you see who's here in force. The tech bros are all here in force, and not so many tech sisters, but a lot of tech bros.
But tell me, you know, it's a question we often talk about even back home. What if this CapEx doesn't turn profitable? Well, will it really?
At the moment, it seems to be yielding. I mean, Oracle is the only one that seems to be sort of leveraged, you know, and then to get the deal done on WBD, there'll have some personal pledges of stock and all that sort of stuff. So there's more leverage there. But this is different, we think, the analysis to the internet boom and bust, in the sense that the cash flows, the profitability and the margins are still very high. So at Google, Amazon's going to spend 135 billion this year of the 550. Google, I think it's 85. Meta, 75. It's huge. Alibaba, even the Chinese are joining in. No, Alibaba was 35 billion, I think, this year. So they are, but they are not capital expenditures that prejudice the cash flow or over-leverage the business yet. To your point, the rate of growth of these spending, so it's, I think the 550 billion is 35% more than last year. If they spend it, the rate of growth is going to decline. So the rate of growth of revenue from the capex in theory will kind of come down. Yeah. So that will come. So maybe, I mean, yesterday somebody who should know what he's talking about said he does think there's a boom. But he said a very interesting thing. He said SpaceX is coming along the pike. That'll go out at, I don't know what the valuation, $1.5 trillion people talk about. That would be the biggest IPO ever. A lot of wealth created, particularly of right-wing Republicans who will want to fund PACs just like Elon Musk did.
What do you think about that relationship, though?
What relationship?
Elon and Trump.
Well, it seems to continue. despite the fracture. There seems to be. I mean, I've always thought it would be a relationship would last. It didn't apparently, but it has in a way. So I think it's mutually beneficial. And the guy is a genius. I mean, they're both geniuses
in their own ways. Yes, they are. So as we look ahead into the world, we're sorted in corporate profitability. Who could emerge as, say, the dark horse? It turned out to be China about a year and a half back when they had the DeepSeek moment.
Well, that still has to be played out.
Would it continue to be China?
No, I think in terms of technology and AI, the big threat to the US and US domination is China. And I would say that China has a very good shot. Open systems, Minimax, for example, which we've got a sort of close relationship with and have looked at. You know, these are Chinese graduates who went to America, Stanford, went to work for Google and Apple, came back to look after their parents because they're growing old, and also make China great again. So, I mean, in all seriousness, that is a wave of Chinese entrepreneurs, so not to be underestimated, and they do it differently. Open systems, lower cost. So that has to be sorted. Saudi, UAE, G42, Humane, you know, a force, whether they can compete at the same level as the US and China. But I think you asked who the dark horse, I don't think they're a dark horse. They're a white horse. We know that they're there. I don't think there's any black swans out there. I think it's a race between US and China, and it's going to be very close. Never underestimate America. I mean, America's vibrancy, strength, entrepreneurial dynamism, capital markets, put them in a huge, I mean, you see it here, hugely powerful position, and everybody will have to bend the knee to that, you know, as we're seeing on Greenland, like it or not. I mean, my prediction is there will be some sort of form of agreement around Greenland. I don't know what it will be, but I think, in a way, I think Trump is right. I mean, it is, if you think about it from a geography point of view, if your view is the Donroe Doctrine or a new form of the Monroe Doctrine and the Western Hemisphere, I mean, there's a famous cartoon by a cartoonist called James Gilray. I think he was a disciple of Hogarth or the other way around. And he has a cartoon of Napoleon and William Pitt, the UK Prime Minister, carving up the world. And the British got a bigger slice on this cartoon. And Napoleon had a smaller slice. And it sort of reminds me of that. I sort of have this image of Trump, Xi, and Putin sort of carving up the world. And in a funny way, it sort of feels that that's what's happening. We shall see. We shall see what happens. But Trump has certainly captured the agenda. So it won't be a dialogue. It's going to be a monologue.
And the dollar dominance stays.
Well, that's a big issue because the dollar has weakened. I mean, it's now 133 to the pound, and it was weaker on all this uncertainty. And of course, the gold and silver has gone through the roof. So there must be a lot of Indians making a lot of money on the gold and silver markets.
Yes. So you think after this volatility, the dollar will emerge back as a winner?
We'll see. I mean, Trump's policies probably end up weakening the dollar further, but maybe that's what he wants to see.
So more gold and silver, more Indians getting richer.
Well, it's remarkable. I mean, what's been happening in the commodity markets from a value point of view. So we have to see what happens. But that's a reflection of the instability and uncertainty. But I come back to the point I was making before. Companies are doing very, very well. I mean, this is the remarkable thing. And I think the reason they're doing well is they're managing their costs well. That's why the advertising business is under pressure. They're managing their supply chains extremely effectively. You know, it's procurement driven, it's CFO driven, margin driven. And margin's all-time high. Capital as a proportion to GDP, all-time high. Labor as a proportion to GDP, all-time low. This is not about AI yet. That's to come. So the AI revolution, which I think will come when things weaken, the force to change AI and implement AI will get greater. So in automobiles and financial services, we see significant pressure to change because there's a threat of the Chinese EVs or the AVs. or the threat of the fintech platforms, and you ones that are much more flexible than banks, the traditional banks. So you get this economic pressure. So we need a bit of economic pressure to get people to adopt AI
quicker,
and for the advertising cash tills to ring.